to talk about today is I get to talk about risk. I spent 44 years as a risk manager in various roles in the insurance industry. And so combining the two of these thoughts, these two passions together, I think is going to be fun. So bear with me as we go through this. Hopefully, you'll take away something from this. I'm a firm believer that every presentation you see, you should try to take away three things that you're going to do to better yourself as you move forward. So help me as I go through this journey, if you will, of how courageous leadership, easy for me to say, it's early, how you deal with that in the face of risk. So a little bit of info, but I'll skip past that. Kelly did a wonderful job of introducing me, and the slides will be available to you as well. So if you want more detail, the question always is, what is courage, right? And one example I'll give you, and there's a risk in me talking about this because I understand not everybody in the world knows The Wizard of Oz and that classic movie. But if you recall, there was a lion in that movie, and he was defined as the cowardly lion. And this is sort of a conversation that went on, and you might remember these words. The cowardly lion said, "I'm a coward. I even scare myself," and he's sobbing. "I look at the circles under my eyes. I haven't slept in weeks." And the Tin Man says to him, "Why don't you try counting sheep?" And the cowardly lion turned to the Tin Man and said, "That doesn't do any good. I'm afraid of them." Part of the problem, oftentimes, when we have to act courageously, we have fear, right? That fear drives our outcomes. The fear of fear. And so I wanted to share that with you because there are two words that sort of define in many people's minds the same thing, and that's bravery versus courage. And bravery is the action of confronting danger or difficulty without fear. The soldier who charges the hill, bringing his troops behind him in the face of danger, continues to go on because it's the thing he believes he needs to do, right? Whereas courage is the mental strength to act despite fear. And I would tell you that most of us deal with courage issues and not bravery. The things we do day to day are not life or death. Oftentimes, they are making decisions where outcomes could be exactly what we want, or it could be devastating to us. So think of bravery as being fearless, often quick to act impulsively, and think of courage, on the other hand, as an intentional, eternal heart decision to face the fear, persevere, especially for a greater cause. Now, I always like to open up sessions like this with a story. So let me tell you this quick story about courage. So Maria was leading a project team, and two of her best people, James and Pira, were at odds. Both were talented, both were passionate, but the conflict was spilling over into the rest of the team meetings. And the tension was slowing everybody down. And now Maria figured, I'm facing a risk right now. And we'll talk about what that risk is in a minute. If she ignored the conflict, deadlines could be missed, morale would sink, her credibility might take a hit. But if she stepped in, there'd be discomfort, defensiveness, maybe even more conflict. That's the leadership moment of truth. Is it courage or comfort? Would you have the courage? So what I want to do now is talk about the courage. I love this graphic. It's amazing. The fish in the bowl with the other fish, but sees another bowl, maybe through the glass, and decides that it's going to take the jump, make the leap. There's risk in everything we do. Driving a car, do you put your seatbelt on? When you pull up to a stoplight and the light turns green, do you immediately go or do you pause for a second? Just to be sure it's safe. Just like walking down the street. Or one of my favorites, choosing the best cereal in the grocery store. I labor over that sometimes, looking at the granola and Captain Crunch with Crunch Berries, evaluating, and we'll talk about those steps, but ultimately picking the Captain Crunch just because I like it. Most importantly, leadership decisions have risk. There's no question about that. So making the jump without assessing the risk can be disastrous, right? What if the fish miscalculated and it landed on the table instead of in the water? It better hope that whoever owns that fish is nearby, they can scoop them up and put them back in the bowl. What if the water's too hot? Fish are affected by heat. The water that they came was very comfortable. The water in the other bowl might be not conducive to a fish. And what about the loneliness of being in that other fish bowl all by yourself? Those are risks. So the question becomes, how can we assess risk in a meaningful way so that we limit or eliminate those outcomes? Now, I will tell you, it's all about managing risk. And that's what the insurance professionals do every day. Now, I promise you, I am not going to bore you with a bunch of insurance stuff. I'm not going to talk about premiums and policies and perils and exclusions, conditions, because insurance is only one solution in managing risk. You see, managing risk is really part of our everyday life. Even outside of insurance, sometimes we don't even know it by that name. We all do it. So my goal today is to, one, understand what risk management is, but also to share with you the process, because it is a process. It's a systematic approach that helps people and organizations anticipate and manage problems, minimize losses, and achieve objectives. That's what insurance is all about. When you think about it, see, we really all do it in some way or another. You think about decisions you make. You probably have gone through that. What I hope to do today is put some structure around this for you. For those of us in the business, this is sort of a natural progression. We've done it so long. It's a skill that's sort of committed to memory, and we understand it and can process. For those that are not in the world that we're in the insurance industry, these may be new to you, but this is a skill set that's important to have, to master, and to use in everyday life, not just in the courageous decisions you're going to make as a leader, but even picking out the cereal in the grocery store aisle like I do. My wife laughs at me all the time about that. Risk management is used to assess risk in insurance, and it's a process that's used to determine the best outcome for leaders. That's what insurance agents do when they try to select a risk. That's what insurance underwriters do, what claims adjusters do. Everybody in the insurance sort of industry has those skills. And if you look at that graphic, there are 5 parts to this: identification, analysis, assessment, treatment, and monitoring. I'm going to go through each of those now in a little bit more detail. And again, I promise I'm not going to bore you with a lot of insurance stuff. Risk identification. The core risks identified in my story was one that immediately jumped out to me, that ignoring the conflict between James and Pyrrha was a risk. And Maria had to make some decision about that. So she had to identify those risks. What were they? She had to analyze then what was happening around it. The core risk was James and Pyrrha's conflict, if you will. And there are 2 categories that those risks fall into: inaction consequences, which have a very high likelihood and a very high impact, and action consequences that have a medium likelihood and a medium impact. And Maria had to categorize those risks, if you will, into those two categories as part of that analysis. So what came next was her assessment. As she looked at the core risks and the challenge she had, when she looked at the inaction consequences, if she did nothing, what would happen? Well, probably the most scary part about the whole thing is that she'd miss deadlines and productivity would drop off because everybody was sort of watching the 2 battle for power in that situation. It would lower team morale and increase tension across the whole team. No one likes to see people sort of infighting. And the part of the leader is to sort of try to soften that. The next one, where she took no action at all, Maria would lose credibility with her leader. if the project wasn't delivered, there are downstream impacts to that. So Maria has this overarching everything is, I can't allow this not to happen. Those action consequences, those that are medium likelihood and medium impact, were things that, as Maria looked deeply into the challenge that was facing her, there'd be some short-term discomfort and maybe even some defensiveness. Think about the conversations that Maria potentially could have with James and Pyrrha. How would those go? She wasn't certain, probably. So she wanted to make sure that she understood what the risk was and the likelihood that it might happen. The conflict might escalate. Sometimes when people are confronted, when they're not cooperating with each other, then it gets worse, much worse than better. And the last one, and certainly one I think that's probably one of the most important things, is that one or both of the employees might feel slighted. We're trying to create this inclusive world, and everybody is part of the decision and the project, and you don't want to separate them out. You don't want them to feel slighted and potentially give up, because they're the best people. They're her two best. So you can see where those challenges are and how Maria looked deeply at that based on that first part of that story that I shared with you, how she would look at each of those risks and assess the likelihood, if you will, and the potential outcome of that. So the next step in this process is treatment. Oops, sorry, my mouse has a mind of its own. These are the common treatments of risk. You can retain it, which means I'm just going to accept it the way it is. It's a very low likelihood, maybe, and a very low impact to my project. If it happens, I'll deal with it. It's probably not life-threatening, and certainly the project will continue even in those. So some risks we'll keep. There's some risks we'll avoid completely. Think about it in the insurance world, a risk that's uninsurable, that the outcome is almost guaranteed that something will happen and there'll be downstream impacts. So sometimes we just want to avoid that. Maybe it's you're not comfortable driving cars. You feel that you don't have the skills, and so you don't drive. You hope that other people do. You take public transportation, whatever it is, but you avoid the risk. The next one, and one thing about avoidance too, it's not oftentimes feasible, particularly in Maria's case. She can't afford the conflict because it's already there. She has to deal with that. In terms of reduction, oftentimes this is the best solutions. Transfer. Transfer is to escalate it to someplace else, right? Maybe the opportunity is to go to HR, have HR sit in with a conversation with James and Pyrrha to talk about the challenge. While that may be an alternative, it may not be the best alternative because it may undermine Maria's credibility with James and Pyrrha. Reduction, to proactively mediate and clarify the roles and reset expectation. That's certainly a potential outcome in this, and one that Maria could consider, right? How do I sort of lower the temperature? How do I keep James and Pyrrha engaged? There'll be challenges to that, and that may be the best solution under those circumstances. The last one is exploit. So sometimes the risk is actually a benefit to you, and so you might want to take further advantage of it. Maybe it's a market condition, or maybe it's a case where we'll get others to pick up the slack, whatever it might be. But exploit is typically not one, at least in this circumstance, with what I would recommend. Doing nothing and absorbing the negative outcomes, typically, and particularly in this, is probably the one that's most disastrous, right? So when I think about that, I think that courageous leaders need to choose the best solutions oftentimes. After they've identified and analyzed and then assessed the real risk, the likelihood, and the impacts, they have to make those decisions. How am I going to manage this situation? The risk to this project, because as the leader, that's my responsibility. Understanding the potential outcomes through risk management is the best way to make decisions. In fact, it makes decisions easier. So that's the treatment part. The next step in this whole process is the solution, the action. What course of action am I going to take after I've looked at all of the risks and the assessment of that, and I've thought through the likely outcomes? I'm going to apply the risk reduction strategy for a couple of reasons. And some of the things I might do. And these are the things that, as you're going through that process, if I'm doing that on an insurance risk, I would write these things down as things that I need to do, and then create my plan in terms of how to. So the first one might be to hold private one-on-one conversations with James and Pira, right? It might also be, another solution would be to facilitate a joint conversation to establish the clarity, what their roles are, and then to rebuild trust between each other and certainly with Maria. The next one is to reinforce the team's shared goals and values. And that's this piece of accountability. Right? When you're part of the team, you're accountable for the results of that team. That's why you were chosen to be part of that. And it's the leadership's role, the leader's role, to be sure that the entire team, both that they celebrate the success, and they also work closely together to solve the problems. So reinforcing that with Priya and James, and giving the expectation that without them, the project would not succeed, that it potentially would fail. So now they're more deeply engaged because Maria has entrusted them with the same responsibilities she has, if they're willing to accept it. The next step in this process is monitoring. So once things are in place, it's important to see that the results that you expected occur. And in the risk management process in insurance, it's once I've applied whatever tools I'm going to do to treat the risk, purchase insurance, avoid the risk, eliminate certain practices, whatever it might be for a commercial exposure or for myself in my own driving, right? If I'm going to purchase a car that has many more safety features, because safety is really important to me. But my solution, I need to monitor to see, in fact, did I get the results I expected? So what Maria will do, and what she'll write down on that same piece of paper when she's listed her tactics, the things she's going to do with James and Pira and the team, is to schedule check-ins. How are things going, both individually and jointly? Are we making progress? Has the tension subsided to the point where now the whole team is working together? You need to watch the teams. In this case with Maria, she needs to watch the team dynamics for signs of lingering tension, because the tension spread, no doubt. When two individuals on the team are the team recognizes it, they feel it, and those tensions are transferred to the rest of the team. So she needs to spend time making sure that the rest of the team is back on task, that they're charging ahead to that goal to get that system delivered. And if things don't go as she expects, as you would do with any monitoring, you need to adapt the approach for further coaching potentially, or some role adjustments. But she has to have those plans in place, because the dynamics of this happen quickly. You don't often have time to sit and labor over the decision process. You have to have your plan. These are my mediation reduction steps, and these are my monitoring steps. These are the things I'm going to work on or watch closely so that we continue to move forward. The question is why? So why do we do this? If you understand the risks and their consequences, leaders can do certain things. You can ensure that they treat those they lead fairly and with respect. That's such an important part. That's the way you build the foundation of a leader to those that are being led, the team, trust. Because trust is a two-way street. So Maria needs to act in that way that the team trusts her and she trusts the team. It's important to do this because you're trying to protect your resources. In order to accomplish this task, she was very clear that she needed James and Pierre on that team because of her best. And so by having them on the team, she needed to be sure that those resources are protected, because she knows that her outcome is much greater, the fact that she'll accomplish the goal, the team will, with them. You need to be able to minimize negative outcomes. Not just in the case of Maria, sort of that spread of tension, to reduce it, to get the team, again, back working together, but thinking about it in just risk management, insurance related things, is to minimize the outcome. If I've done the right steps, then the negative outcomes are not disastrous. In fact, hopefully they're all positive. She needs to seize opportunities. Things will happen. The dynamics of that team will work, and there'll be opportunities through that to recognize great performance, to give credit to the team for the work that they did. She needs to remain compliant. Oops, oh my, some days I like to throw my mouse out the window. Apologize. She has to remain in compliance, right, with regulations. All these things, creating a new system or a new product, whatever it is has to be done in a legal manner, and there are regulations behind that. So she needs to assess those risks as well. Missteps of the team could mean that they were out of compliance. And ultimately, if she's doing this, if she's using the risk management process to help understand the risks associated with what she's discovered with that team, if she does them correctly, she'll ensure her long-term success, the completion of the product, the system, whatever it might be. And ultimately, the team now who has been successful working together, when the next project comes, they'll have already remembered, they'll have memory of how Maria steered that project to completion and how collectively they all succeeded in that project. So I'll take you back through that story for a minute. So let me remind you, it's Maria leading a project team, and their two best people, James and Pira, were at odds. Both were talented, both were passionate, but their conflict was spilling into the team meetings, and the tension was slowing everybody down, right? And Maria had this risk, right, in front of her. If she ignored the conflict, the deadlines could have been missed, the morale would sink, and her credibility might take a hit. If she stepped in, there could be discomfort. There could be defensiveness and maybe even more conflict. So she was at this leadership moment of truth. Am I going to have courage, or I'm just going to take the comfort route, not deal with it? There's risk to her in that, but it takes courage to face the fear. And the risk management process is what reduces the fear, if not completely eliminate it. Because we've taken a process, a tried and true process, and assessed the risk. Now we understand what the fears are and we have solutions to them. So in this case, Maria took courage. So she did speak privately with each of them, listening carefully, not just talking, but hearing. And then she brought them together and said, our success depends on both of your strengths. Let's figure out how to best combine them. Well, I'm sure there was probably still some tension to that, but that was a profound statement. It was recognition by Maria that without James and Priya, that this project might not succeed. And she is asking them to help be accountable, to use their skills to help complete this project. And certainly at first emotions ran high, but Maria stayed calm. And that's the most important part of leadership. Don't get caught in the moment. Remain calm, listen, be transparent, but firm. With the roles better clarified, expectations reset, and the conflict began to shift. And as the story continues, 2 weeks later, the team nailed the deadline. The likelihood when this first happened with Maria, she felt pretty uncertain. In fact, she was fearful that it wouldn't happen. But she took the time to analyze the situation, to identify the risk and analyze what those risks are and assess that, come up with a treatment plan, and ultimately monitor the results so that it came in exactly as she had hoped and made adjustments as she deemed necessary to continue to have the team work together. In fact, the client said it was the best presentations they had ever seen. The fun part of this is that James and Pyrrha, they were laughing together about their stormy start. The lesson in this is that courageous leadership doesn't eliminate conflict. It faces it with empathy, clarity, and conviction. And it turned risk into growth. Maria's a better leader now because she went through the process. She went through the risk management process and she came up with a solution and she had a plan and she had a monitoring plan and a delivery and she executed on it, even in the face of fear. And I would say that the fear that she faced after she did that was very different than the one before. Because she felt comfortable that she understood and she was willing to listen and bring the two back together and ultimately the team. The risk of leading courageously is reduced by managing risk. And I believe that very deeply. There are very simple steps to this whole process, right? Identification, analysis, assessment, a treatment, and monitoring. And you can apply this to any dilemma we face as leaders, if you think about it. If you take those steps, understand that, create your plan so that you know exactly the steps, but be flexible, knowing that while you may think you understand what the outcome, sometimes things don't work exactly as you'd hope. And so you need to make sure that you have thought of the contingencies. It takes a little time to complete the process. And oftentimes you do. But I would say in this circumstance, the number one priority Maria had was to get this project done. And the greatest risk to her getting it done was that James and Pyrrha, her two best people, weren't seeing eye to eye on what their role was. I'll tell you, it works. Even when I'm in the grocery store aisle trying to decide between the best cereal to buy. My wife laughs at me. I mentioned that before. And I have to admit, I'll often still make the wrong choice. I'll choose the Captain Crunch with crunch berries. And they don't even taste like berries. Come on, think about it. But that's the reality. But I keep telling myself that, the risk is low. I guess only time will tell. Courageous leadership is the ability to act with clarity, conviction, and integrity in the face of uncertainty, risk, or opposition. It's not about being fearless. It's about moving forward, prepare despite fear. That's pretty simple, I think, ultimately. I'm sure other speakers have identified that. Speaking of other great leaders, Maria was a great leader because she took the time to solve the problem, to understand the risk, to remove the fear that she had in those circumstances, because she had a goal. And the team was to execute on that. Maria could never have done that all by herself. She needed her team to help do that. And she particularly needed her best two people. And so that priority means that it's worth spending the time. When you think about at the end of all of that, if you were if you were James or Pyrrha, what would you think of Maria? I think if I was those two, I think that Maria was a pretty amazing leader because she took the time to understand. She took the time to help solve it. She took the time to bring them together to succeed. And then the most important part, in my opinion, is the celebration. The success of the team is the team. Whenever Maria speaks to her leadership, they say, congratulations on your project. Maria should say, it's my team. They're the ones that delivered. So I'll leave you with one thought. Am I choosing courage or am I choosing comfort? When I'm thrust into these situations where I have to act courageously, am I comfortable and just sort of letting it go? We'll see what happens. Hey, it blew up. Oh, well. I shift into another dilemma that leaders face, and that's the excuse trap. Am I willing to just excuse it away? No, it happened. It was, we didn't have enough time. There's 1,000 reasons why. Partly we do that because we are fearful. We don't want to take the chance. We don't want to make the effort to try to understand why this issue is in front of, why this dilemma is in front of me. And then most importantly, to use the risk management process to identify the best solution. I've thought through it. I've made those difficult decisions and then to deliver on it. So are you going to choose courage or are you going to choose comfort? Leading courageously is not easy. It's a great opportunity that's given to us by those who put us in leadership roles. And so it's worth the effort. So I thank you all for listening to my stories.
Mike, thank you so much for sharing these ideas that can help us to make decisions in a courageous way, keep us safe, but also keep us moving forward and challenge us to grow and challenge the environments that we're in to grow as well. So this has been fantastic. I'm excited that we'll be able to share this intel with our community, and we will make sure that we have the link available for everyone within the next couple of days. We'll send out emails to everyone to let you know where you can find it. Thanks again for taking the
Thank you
time.
again, Kelly, for the opportunity to share. Thanks, everybody.
Absolutely. Folks, we're going to take about a 15-minute break until our